Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Moondrop Quarks. So this is Moondrop's latest IM. This is a new IM for Moondrop, which is always generally pretty exciting, but this one's exciting for a pretty special reason, and that's the price. Like my favorite Moondrop IM, the Moondrop S8, it's around $700, not a cheap IM. This one's a little bit less than $700. The Quarks is, in fact, under $20. In fact, it's under $15. It's like 13 bucks, which is, I mean, this isn't Moondrop's first budget IM, but I'm pretty sure this is their cheapest one. And I was pretty interested to check this thing out and just kind of spend some time living with it and comparing it to some other IMs in the price range, which frankly, there's not a lot of. You know, typically if you got 20 bucks to buy a pair of IMs, your options are some V-shaped skull candies or something from the gas station. Well, now you've got the Quarks, but is it actually worth listening to? So that's kind of what I really wanted to figure out. I have had these now for about 3 weeks now, kind of taking my time and dilly-dallying on this review, but I have been listening to these things and comparing them with things like Moondrop's earlier spaceship IM, as well as the Tanch Gematanya. So we'll talk about how these things compare, and yeah, we'll do kind of like a full-on ranking of those three in a number of different categories at the end of the review, but first we'll focus here on the Quarks. And like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're watching now live, how's it going? If you have any questions about the Quarks or anything else that we talk about today, please do drop it in the live chat, and at the end of the review, we'll have a little back and forth conversation. But for now, let's just go ahead and dive into the Moondrop Quarks, talk about the physical stuff, because frankly, there's not a lot much to talk about. It's a single dynamic driver earphone, which I think I didn't mention, but that's about what you would expect for the price range. And what you get is you get this. So I did an unboxing of this IM a couple of weeks ago. If you've already seen that, apologies for the repeat here, but just a quick review. Here's the box, a nice, cute, small box. You do get a little carrying pouch, which I believe is the same carrying pouch that came with the Moondrop spaceship. You do also get a little Moondrop branded zip tie, which is nice, as well as, of course, you get a set of ear tips, and these are pretty typical silicone ear tips, Moondrop style. They make a decent set. They're not, you know, necessarily the best ear tips, but frankly, they're fine enough that I would leave these on even much more expensive IMs. They're perfectly fine. But that does it for the accessories, so let's dive into the earphone set itself. And we'll start with this cable, which I gotta be honest, is not, I don't know. As a built-in cables go, there are definitely worse cables out there. In fact, there are some pretty nice things about this thing. You probably get a sense here for how kind of soft and pliable this cable is in general. The aesthetic on it, I think, is a little bit, and it looks cheap, which, I mean, it is cheap. It's a $13 earphone, just as a reminder. But at least like the behavior, and you can see that the roadie wrap is quite easily done here, and it holds its shape. It's a little bit kinked, as you can see, and again, I've had this thing for a couple of weeks, and it still has these kinks built into it, which is a bit of a bummer. But I don't know. I can't really complain about this cable. It's just don't expect like Moondrop SSR cable, which is one of my favorite cables. But that will bring us to, let's see. Well, actually, I'll call this out as we get to it. Unfortunately, it's still got the typical Moondrop Y split, and unfortunately, no chin cinch, which we'll talk about why I missed that in a little bit. But that will bring us up to the earpieces themselves, which frankly, I think these actually look really cool. I mean, it's just simple clear plastic, but it's, I don't know, it's a nice look. I always appreciate being able to look inside of my IMs. The $700 Moondrop S8 that I called out, also a transparent IM, so you can see inside and see the drivers. And now, if I'm being picky, look, there's not a lot to look at inside this thing, but I feel like I'm being pretty silly to be picky about the aesthetic of this thing because it looks pretty cool as is. You can see the dynamic driver kind of positioned there, and then back here is just some wiring. But yeah, apart from that, not much to talk about the aesthetics of this thing. Maybe worth calling out that so left and right earpieces are symmetrical in every way physically, except if you look at them on the back, the right earpiece does have the Quarks logo in red, which makes it fairly easy to differentiate. Unfortunately, there's nothing physical about them that's different. So I can't differentiate these things by feel. That might seem like a minor thing, but if I'm, putting these things into my ears in the dark, or just otherwise like kind of picking them up and getting them ready to put in my ears, I always have to check it. In the dark, you can't check it, so I just kind of have to wing it and not really mind too much about my left and right channels. But there you go. Apart from that, look, these things are also tiny. I don't know if that's coming across. These ear tips, that's a standard size ear tip, and you can see, in fact, these are the medium size ear tips. So you can get a sense for just how itty bitty the Quarks are. Let me go ahead and throw it into my dome so you can get a sense for what they look like inside my ear. And I'll say, as I'm doing that, a couple of nice things about the fit. Right, obviously it's small. If you can kind of see the angle, it's completely flush inside my ear. There's nothing protruding out there, which means the Quarks is actually a pretty good sleeping earphone, and I did sleep with it for a couple of nights. The only thing that I wanted to call out with the fit, and this can be a good thing or a bad thing, is that it actually isolates really, really exceptionally well, which is kind of surprising. I think I read something about the Quarks not having any venting in it, which is a little bit atypical for a dynamic driver earphone. But the side effect of that seems to be that the isolation on this is above average. In fact, it was a stronger isolation than any of the other earphones I was comparing it to. For me, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's also not necessarily a bad thing, but I do know that isolation is a big point for a lot of people. And then as I'm fitting this thing into my ear too, one other thing I should mention is that there is a little bit of driver flex that you can hear as I squish this thing into my ear, and it creates that seal and that little air vacuum. But it's honestly not that bad. And they're much more expensive IMs that have much worse driver flex, but figured I should mention that anyway. So I think that's about as much as I have to say about the physical stuff. Although actually I did say I was going to talk about the lack of a chin cinch. And that's because with an IM like this, right, you can choose to wear it cable down if you choose. This is probably the more typical standard way of wearing the Moondrop Quarks. I prefer, however, to wear this kind of IM still over ear, right? Still wrap it around my ear like this. And that way, any like pulling on the cable pulls on my ear rather than pulling on the IM itself. Makes it a little bit more secure and also reduces microphonics and stuff like that. And when I wear an earphone like that, I like to have a chin cinch because, especially with an IM like this that doesn't have ear hooks in it, a lot of the times when this cable is wrapped around behind your ear, and this is not unique to the Quarks, just pretty much any IM cable without a hook. If this is wrapped around the back of my ear, it's not super stable behind there because it doesn't have that preformed hook. And that's where I find a chin cinch to actually be pretty useful in terms of holding the cable in place. So that does it for the physical. That's it. For real this time, all right? That does it for the physical stuff on the Moondrop Quarks. Let's go ahead and dive into talking about the sound on these things. And just off the bat, let's start by talking about the general sound signature. And I mentioned at the top of the video, right? If you're spending $20 for a pair of IMs, like your options are pretty much all V-shaped, which means you get a lot of bass, you get a lot of treble, and the mid-range is probably the thing that gets sacrificed. Here with the Quarks, interestingly, at this price range, at $13, we've got a mid-range focused tuning here, and it definitely sounds like a mid-range focused earphone, which is pretty interesting. I would say that mid-range tuning is a little bit on the warm side versus like a thin, bright sounding mid-range. I would say this is on the laid back, kind of warm side, although there is still a fair amount of upper mid-range, we'll call it ear gain, or just kind of like that vocal presence does come across fairly forward. So this is not as warm as, I don't know, something like the final E500, but it does have a fairly thick low end that keeps this thing from really sounding very thin. I think that upper mid range that you have there, it does bring the vocals forward, can make them a little bit thin and a little bit squealy. I kind of noted down, but again, that low end body does keep these things from sounding overly thin. Now, what do I like about the sound here on the Quarks? Just off the top, look, I like having a budget option like this that is mid-range tuning. Again, there are not a lot of those options out there. In fact, I can't really, there's, the Moondrop Spaceship is another IM we're going to talk about. This is tuned differently than that. This is pretty unique in this price range. And like, I don't know, the Sony MH755, that's a nice sounding earphone, but that's definitely for bass lovers. And not that this has a lack of bass, it has a pretty decent amount of bass. In fact, I think the body here is pretty good without any obvious smearing of the mid-range or anything like that. But this is not a bass focused tuning. And I like that is unique in this price range. And then I think also worth talking about is the treble here is, I think, also on the tame side, frankly. If you have issues with overly bright earphones, if you have issues with, maybe you're bothered by sibilance or you're just kind of irritated by treble in general, I don't think you're going to have an issue here with the Moondrop Quarks just because it's relatively tame throughout. But what does that leave for the downsides? And frankly, I think in terms of like what I don't love about the sound here in the Quarks is that what I've just described is a little bit boring, if I'm perfectly frank. Like, it's just, apart from the fact that it is a unique tonality in this price range, I feel like it doesn't really offer a lot that is standout, which, okay, it's a $13 earphone, so my expectations probably shouldn't be looking for standout sound, but sometimes you get surprised. And here, I think it's just kind of boring. It's mid-range tuning, that is unique. But in terms of like detail and technicalities and soundstage and anything like that, this is just, it's pretty boring. The treble tuning that I described, which could be a big pro for a lot of people, for me, I find it a little bit on the dull side. Just sounds a little bit soft and a little bit, I don't know, definition isn't necessarily that bad. I think it's, okay with separation and the imaging and stuff like that. Like, it's decent, but it's also not great. Like, it's fairly two-dimensional sounding. I did write down too, I described it as a little bit claustrophobic sounding. It's just a little bit midsy, and generally I'm a midsy guy, so take this for what it is. But I don't know. I find it a little bit on the boring side just overall. And then the bass that is there, again, not a bass focused IM. And the bass levels I actually think are pretty well done. Again, don't have any issues with the smearing and stuff like that. But I don't know. Still, bass texture is not a strong suit. It hits a little bit on the flat side. So that's, my general take on the sound here with the Moondrop Quarks. But how does that compare to some other IMs like the Tantiem Tanya and then Moondrop's earlier Moondrop Spaceship? So just a quick disclaimer on the prices here. These are not all the same price, and I know at this budget the differences start to become more significant, but this is a $13 earphone, the cheapest of the bunch. This is a $20 earphone, I believe, for the Spaceship, and then the Tanya, I believe, was $24, although it's already I've already forgotten how cheap that thing was. So there are your kind of three options in this $20-ish range. At least the ones that I think are most comparable. Let's go ahead and rank them in just a handful of different categories. And we'll start with the general tonality, just the tuning of these earphones. And I think they all have some pros, they all have some cons. And how I'll rank these is I'll say I actually think the tuning on the Quarks is probably my favorite, followed by the Spaceship, and then followed by the Tanya. So now the difference is here. Like I mentioned, the Quarks is very mid-range focus, just kind of a very polite tuning. And frankly, it's pretty pleasant all around, whereas here on the Spaceship, also kind of a neutral-ish sound signature, but more... it's a little bit more skewed because there's definitely a lot more upper mid-range and especially lower treble emphasis here on the Spaceship. I don't necessarily find the treble fatiguing or anything, but it does skew the tonality and makes it brighter tune, which I think is just not as well balanced as the tuning that you have here on the Quarks. And then here on the Tanya, this is the one that's actually going to appeal, I think, to more people. This is the more V-shaped tuning. It has bigger bass, especially big mid bass into sub bass, and then it has still some decent vocal presence, but the mid range gets sacrificed because of that. I think the one thing really going for the Tanya though is it does seem to have the best sort of treble extension, which can play into having a little bit better technicalities, I guess, but maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's go ahead and then now talk about these things in terms of bass and I think I would have to rank the Tanya as tops and bass, even though it's more bass than I like. I find these things to be intruding into the range of being a little bit bloated. I would call the Tanya bloated, but if you're just looking for a nice bassy earphone, the Tanya honestly is not bad at all. Next up, I would say the Quarks. You know, again, it's not a very bass focused IM, but the bass that's there, it's got a nice body and it actually extends pretty well into the sub bass frequencies, which for a budget IM like that, that's actually pretty impressive. And then leading up, or not leading up, heading up the rear, I'll leave the spaceship, where the bass is more mid-bass focus. It's a little bit, it's definitely the lightest of the bass. So if you're looking for the most bass, this would be the last to pick. But in terms of its execution, it's also just, it extends the least well into the sub bass frequencies. And what's there is fine, but I think bass is definitely not a strong suit here on the spaceship. Now, all right, now let's rank them in terms of treble. And I mean, we're just kind of going based on quantities here. I'll probably rank them like this. I think the spaceship, again, this is the brighter tuned earphone. It does have more treble, especially in the lower treble frequencies, and I think that does help out with things like soundstage separation, imaging, and stuff like that. That does seem to be the strong suit here in the spaceship. Whereas the Tanya, actually, you know, it is kind of a little bit bloated in that bass region, but because of the extended treble, I think it does save it here. And then I'll leave Quarks here at the end for just kind of having the most nothing treble. Again, very polite treble. It's just not that engaging, which I guess is going to take us now to my engagement rankings, which I'm actually going to leave them in this exact same arrangement. So for me, engagement, like, this is kind of a catch-all term for just how much do I enjoy listening to it, and a lot of that's going to come down to, first of all, I have to enjoy the tuning at least somewhat, but is it fun to listen to? Is it like exciting? Is it, what does it do? And for me, the Moondrop Spaceship's actually still my favorite of these three. Again, it's kind of the brightest, the leanest tuned, not the best tuned of the bunch, but that treble emphasis does, again, make these things a little bit more dynamic in terms of the stereo separation and creating just that sort of 3D sense to the sound. The Tanya's not a big slouch there, frankly, despite the fact that there is more bass than there should be, in my opinion. This is just a bassy IM. It's still actually pretty fun, and it still presents like a pretty decent, you know, head stage. And then I think that extended treble that is there is probably doing a lot of work in terms of making sure that the sound never sounds overly smeary and overly boring and bloated. And that will leave the Quarks for last. Again, like, the tuning is pretty solid on these things, but it is a little bit boring. And I think that the side effect of that somewhat tame, that pretty tame treble performance, means that this is just, it's very 2D. Again, I describe this as kind of claustrophobic sounding. It's not bad, and it's just not the most exciting. And I guess my last ranking, I was going to rank them in terms of build quality, and that will be we'll swap them like this. I think the Spaceship have the nicest build quality of the bunch. They do actually have these really solid metal shells with a decent amount of weight. I love the way these things are built for 20 bucks. The cable's also not the best, but yeah, the build quality in the buds is pretty nice. Next up, I would say the Quarks build quality is pretty solid. For 13 bucks, really hard to complain, although of course I did find ways to complain about it. My biggest complaint, the only real serious complaint, is I really do wish that you could feel the difference between the left and the right channels. And then the final build quality, I'm going to leave the Tanya. I think the earpieces are really quite lightweight and don't inspire a lot of confidence, which is fine for 24 bucks. The cable's actually pretty nice on these things. In fact, this is probably the best cable of the three. Unfortunately, these just kind of like fall apart, like literally fall apart. Sometimes when I take the ear tips off of them, I don't know if they forgot to put glue on my set or something like that, but that will leave these things at the end for build quality. So I think that's going to do it for my review of the Moondrop Quarks and my comparisons to some comparable earphones. But what does that leave these things in terms of a score. So out of 5 stars, I'm going to give the Moondrop Quarks a very solid 3 stars. And I was on the verge of like, I don't have a good reason to not give it 4 stars. Like, this is a very solid set for $13. Is that what it is? $12.99. Just a really, a well-tuned IEM that is inoffensive in every single way. It's just also not that exciting. I mean, I feel like if I'm spending $13 on an IEM, I can't think of anything else that I would choose, frankly, above this, but it's also like, it's not so engaging and exciting that I think if you already have some other IEMs out there that you need to go out and buy these things just to have them in your collection. It's not a bad choice, but I don't know. I'm not that excited about them. So that is the Moondrop Quarks. If you're interested in checking these things out, I do have a link in the description down below, and shout out to Shenzhen Audio for sending these things in for review. While you're down there, if you like this video, please do hit the like button. Helps me out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ding the YouTube bell. And then I'll catch you on the next super review, unless you're here live, in which case hang around and let's have a chat. All right, folks, let me catch up with live chat and see if anyone's got any questions about the Quarks or the Tanyas or the spaceships or anything else that's going on while I take a sip of Waterloo. Hashtag not sponsored. All right, catching up with live chat. Ooh, first username in there is a doozy. I'm going to try this one just for fun. Ekfun du roll to. Yeah, okay. Thanks for joining the chat. DNTR, always glad to see you there. There's your dab. Kranos Mines, how's it going? Nice to see you again as well. And War Zamir, what's up? Yowza saying, yep. Planet Jace, how's it going from down under? Glad you were able to make it. You said you weren't able to make the past couple, but glad we were able to do it today. Hopefully no one busts you at work. Carlos saying, oh, I've been waiting for this review. Yeah, unfortunately, a number of people have been waiting for this review, and I've been a bit lazy about reviewing it, so I apologize for that. But now we've got it done. Now you know, the Moondrop Quarks, a very solid IM for $13. If you got $13 to spend on IM, I can't think of a better way to do it. But if you just got $13 burning a hole in your pocket, I don't know. You could do worse than buy the Quarks, but I don't know that I would rush out and do it. Susban, yo, 5 star. Wow, that was a bold guess. Fatih saying, I'm one of 2 channels with the active notification bell. Glad to hear. Actually kind of curious, does it work for you? Does it work reliably? I have some people tell me that the bell doesn't work for them, and I wonder if it's just because they have too many bells. You've only got 2 bells, so maybe it works pretty reliably for you. Precog Vision, what's up? Glad to see you there. Planet J saying most of us have kinks built in. Yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not here to kink shame anybody, but when it comes to cables, I like them to wind up nice and circular like this. This right here, that's a nice looking wind. Now this cable is a little bit on the stiff side, and it's a little bit memory prone too. You can see it's gonna like turn itself back into a ring. That is not desirable either. But I'm going to set this thing on a table and wind it up with the old roadie wrap. I want it to look like that. And unfortunately, the Quarks, maybe we won't call them kinks. Maybe we'll just call them bends. Because again, I'm not here to kink shame anybody. But that, I could do without. Nadmin, Ohio, what's up? How's it going? Nice to see you there. Alejandro saying the simplicity of the Quarks design is an aesthetic. Couldn't you use the Y-split to tell which is right and which one is left? Interesting theory. Let's see. Let's put that to the test right now. Can I, by feel, tell which one is left and right? So this thing has some print on this side as well as this side. And yeah, I guess you should be able to. Like, I can feel that this print is going horizontal and that this print is a little bit less defined in terms of its direction. So if I were to feel this thing, I can be like, okay, that's, let's say, the back side. I actually don't know that. And then from here, I could pull up and pull, yep, that's the right side. So I know that that Moondrop logo, which I can feel being horizontal, is the right side. Yeah, I could do that. I could figure that out. That is a bit, that's a bit of work, frankly, versus something like, I'll pull this one in real quickly, the spaceship. You know, it's a very subtle thing. Let's see if we can even get it to show up in the camera. It's a very subtle thing, but there is this little bump on the left side earpiece. So as I'm picking these things up, I can just feel them. I can kind of give it a little rub, know that I've got them in the right fingers or the right hands, and if not, swap them. And that's all I need. And I think the Tanya might have been similar, but I actually forget. The Tanya might also be completely symmetrical to the touch. In fact, it does seem to be. So again, not a problem that is unique to the Quarks. And frankly, yes, you could use the Y-split as a way to figure that out, but I don't know that that necessarily solves my personal complaints, because that's kind of an elaborate process. Caddy, do these beat out the final E3000? I haven't heard the final E3000, so I don't know. And then I have heard the final E2000, but it's been a really long time since I listened to that one, so not sure. Here's what I will say though. I didn't compare these things to the final E500, which was the IM that in an earlier comparison, like a couple months ago, beat out both of these. And so, I don't know. I think this is probably somewhere in between. Like, I didn't actually rank these in terms of my preference. I would say if I were buying them for myself, I would still pick the Spaceship. I'd probably pick the Quarks next and the Tanya last. The final E500, I would still say is my favorite of the bunch. Now, I don't know what that means for the E3000. I think the E3000 is maybe a warmer, bassier tune. So I'd probably be less likely to like that one myself. Rob Hawk, what's up? Scott Pledger with the important question. All I want to know is, are they quirky? Yeah, I guess. Hiran, did you delete a pun? I want to know. Oh, Nonmin with actually an interesting point. Nonmin saying, I hope they make them with consistent quality control, which I don't know. I don't want to make too broad of generalizations, but usually in the budget, as you're spending less money, the manufacturers have less budget, less headroom to spend on things like quality control. And I'll say that in terms of like the physical aspects, I have no issues with the quality here. I don't know how well this thing will be durable over time, but frankly, you know, I don't have any big concerns about the durability of this thing. The one thing that is worth calling out is that there is actually fairly significant channel imbalance between these two. Now, it's significant in terms of measurement. If you look on squig.link and look up the Moondrop Quarks, you can see the measurement. I have measurements for both the left and the right channels. To my ear, I'm not hearing an obvious difference, which is good. And so for my purposes, I'm not really concerned about that channel imbalance, which is why I didn't even write it in my notes for the review. But in terms of quality control, like, you would expect the channel matching to be a little bit nicer on most IMs, frankly. It's not the best here. But that does also seem to be a problem that's fairly unique to my measurements. I've seen some other measurements of the Quarks, and it doesn't seem obvious that there's like an issue with channel imbalance, whereas something like Final Stuff apparently has issues with channel imbalance. Again, to my ear, I'm not picking it out, so it's not obvious to me. But if you're particular about that kind of stuff, or you're actually pretty sensitive to it, a thing worth considering, I suppose. Precog saying Quarks canceled Cop Tanya. Yeah, so Precog's a big fan of the Tanya. I know a lot of people are a big fan of the Tanya. So just to be clear, like, don't let my personal rankings make you not interested in the Tanya. The Tanya's got a lot going for it. This is a fun sounding earphone for the price range. It's just too much bass for me. It's boomy, and it's not the best bass. So there. Alejandro asking, but do they jam? Is that like a meme from some other channel? I'm not familiar with that one. What's up, Martin Ferreira? Woo, Andrew, how's it going? Nice to see you. Glad you could make it for this one. And I don't know. I don't think we've talked before. So always good to see a new name. Blanky asking, am I getting the Miku version of the Aria? No plans. No, I haven't. In fact, I don't think I've even heard of that. I saw a question about my top 5 lists, and then YouTube scrolled it away. Okay, Martine asking, do I think my top 5 lists hold up to date, or would I make some changes? I probably would make some changes. I think the best place to get a sense for what my not necessarily in top 5 order, but like what my top IMs at different price ranges is, would be actually head over to squig.link and look for the link in the header called rankings. And there I've got this list of every IM that I have graphed in SquigLink, along with scores, which includes scores for IMs I've reviewed, including their like updated scores. So some of my reviews are a little bit old at this time, and I've updated my expectations. But there's also some scores for IMs that I haven't reviewed. They're just IMs that I've spent some amount of time listening to, and maybe they're not the most qualified of scores. Like the IMs where I got to spend weeks with them are going to be more qualified and more solid, I think. But there's still a lot of IMs that I've heard, in fact, thanks to Precog, that sound pretty phenomenal, and some that sound okay that I wouldn't have normally had a chance to hear. And so I was able to add those into that rankings list. So that would be my recommendation. If you want a sense for what are my top 5 IMs at $20 or at $50 or at $100 or whatever, go to that page, squig.link/list, and filter it by the price range you want. Filter it to 4 and 5 star reviews, and you have a pretty good list. Jeffrey with maybe maybe it's a reference to the title saying cost KSC75X baby. And yeah, I think if you want the best sound quality you can get for under 20 bucks, I think cost KSC75 is still it, incredibly. Humdrum Ant saying, I had COVID last week and I binged a lot of your videos during my isolation, so love from the UK for that. Wow. Sounds like you're doing better. I hope you're doing better. And that's great to hear. And I'm glad I could be of some entertainment factor. I imagine if you're binging my videos and even sticking through like the Q&A sections, I wonder if you start to get a sense for the people, because we have a lot of repeat folks here in the live chat. I wonder if you start to get a sense for not just myself, but the community at large. And if you're into that kind of stuff, I actually recommend the Discord server, which I do have linked in the description down below. We got some really good people there talking about earphones, talking about photography a lot lately. Spaceships are fun to clink together. Yeah, I could see that. Oscar Sanchez, is the Etymotic Evo for $425 on Amazon worth the costs? And that's a tough question. It's a tough question in a number of ways, because like I don't know what your preferences are. I don't know your tolerance for the fit. I don't know a lot of things. I don't know what your frame of reference is, but I can say that for 425 bucks, I think it's a competitive sounding earphone. In fact, I reviewed it at 500 bucks. I gave it 4 stars out of 5. My biggest complaint with that, honestly, they put a different cable on that earphone, and I don't know how they do this, but if they like make it easier to fit, that could have been a pretty serious contender for a 5-star IM, even at $500. So yeah, I think at 425, just check out my review, because there are a lot of things I liked about that sound. It's not going to be for everybody. So check out my review and get a full sense of it before you drop 425 bucks, which is a lot. I guess what I'll say is, I don't think the Evo is like blind buy at 425 bucks good. I think it is very much worth 425 bucks if that's what you want. So just do your research and find out if that's what you want. Carlos asking on the Quarks, is the 3K spike really noticeable or even annoying? So Carlos is referring to the frequency response graph here on the Quarks. And I mentioned that it does have fairly forward upper mid-range, which is that 3K spike. That spike, we'll call it a spike. I don't hear it as like, it's not the same as like a typical treble spike where it kind of creates this harshness. It doesn't do that at all. Like I find it fairly easy to listen to, and because of that lower mid-range and especially mid-bass and bass body, I think it prevents it from really sounding fatiguing at all. I don't think anyone's going to have issues with fatigue here. What it does do though is it makes the vocals just a little bit on almost nasally sounding, a little bit thin, and a little bit on the shrill sound. But again, shrill sounds fatiguing. I don't think that these things sound fatiguing at all. But it does sound a little bit on the thin side. That said, look, I've listened to earphones with much more 3K. The Moondrop SSR, again, being kind of a big favorite of mine. So I personally am not concerned about the 3K on this, and I don't think most people should be. If you are particularly sensitive to that, and you know that you're particularly sensitive to that, maybe. But 3K is kind of at a region where, again, I really don't think it's going to cause fatigue for anybody, if that's your concern. Corgi Staniel, how do these compare in terms of best side sleeping IMs, given that they're so small? I mean, these things are pretty phenomenal for sleeping in, frankly, but I'll say one thing. Well, actually, I'm going to say a couple of things. First thing I'll say is I'm actually primarily a back sleeper. I do roll over a little bit on my side sometimes. Usually it's when I'm like trying to fall asleep and I'm restless. I might roll over to my side, but for the most part, I'm a back sleeper. So I didn't fully put these things to the test with side sleeping. And then the other thing that I'll say is that this bullet style, generally what I find very easy to fit and very easy to lie on my side without them being uncomfortable, but maybe not the most secure fitting, right? And if I'm lying on my side, if you're lying on your side, there's a good chance that you might move around, which is going to have kind of the effect of maybe jostling this thing around and breaking the seal throughout the night, which might not be a problem for you, frankly. In fact, I'm trying to remember if I made it through the night with these things still in my ear. I don't recall specifically, but because of how small this thing is in the ear and how little it touches the rest of my ear, there's nothing to keep it and like kind of support it as it fits in my ear. All of the fit has to do with the friction of my ear canal here on the ear tip. And I find that the most secure fitting IMs through the night are the ones that actually fill out my ear a little bit more. So something like the Thea Audio Legacy 2, a really, really secure fitting IM, or even something like the Sennheiser IE300, which fits nice and flush, but also still fills out the ear a little bit more. So it's more secure and a little bit more resilient to, you know, a pillow kind of mushing up against the side of my ear. But I mean, for 13 bucks, I think these things would actually be pretty fantastic sleeping buds. Scott Pleasure saying, Mark doesn't kink shame people. Never. He kink shames cables, thus kink shaming kinks. That's deep. Nandu saying, I got the Quarks recently and I love the size and comfort. Miss the bass. Best for use during motorcycle rides, fits perfectly inside the helmet. That's actually a really interesting point. I have never had the guts to wear an earphone underneath my motorcycle helmet. I'm just kind of always afraid that it's it's going to be an easy on, hard off sort of scenario. But the Quarks actually think it does seem like an IM that would be pretty good for that, because of how, not just is it a bullet shape IM, right? Some of these other ones here are bullet shape as well, but look at how short this thing is. It's like significantly, I mean, that might not seem like a lot, but the Tanya is already a short IM, and the Quarks is even significantly shorter than that. So there's really no protrusion beyond my ear concha, right? It doesn't come out from my ear concha at all. Can't promise it's going to be like that for everybody, of course, but yeah, I think motorcycle helmet, that is actually might be the IM that I could. Should I try that? I should try that. Not right now, but I should try that. Interesting. And then you followed up, Nandu, saying, I'm very new to the game and your channel helped me out. Thanks a lot. I can tell the difference between good and bad sounding IMs, but I can't quite tell what the difference is. Any advice? My advice, if you're just getting into the IM game and you're trying to compare, like you're hearing the sound differences, and I would try as best as possible to focus on your impressions of the sound. But if you're trying to like take your sort of analysis of that a step further, check out squig.link. In fact, can we do this live? Let's see if we can do this live. I don't have my thing set up for it. Let's see, where are we at? Where? No, does this work? All right, here we go. We're doing it live. So head over to squig.link, and that is this tool right here. And you can pull up my keyboard. You said you've got the Moondrop Quarks, right? So you can plot the frequency response of the Moondrop Quarks. And you can get a sense for, this is, how loud it is at different frequencies within the typical range of human hearing. And if you want to go into a little bit more detail about, how to interpret this, I've actually got this tutorial down here at the bottom. So you could say, upper mid-range, right? You click that, highlight this section of the frequency response and say, hey, this is the upper mid-range. And this is how I interpret this part of the frequency response. Like, to me, this is where a lot of clarity comes in a tune. This is where vocals tend to, like, whether or not vocals are forward or back, kind of comes at play a lot here. And really what you're comparing is, how does this section of the frequency response relate to the other sections of the frequency response, all right? So if I pull up the Tanya as a comparison or as a contrast, that's our green line here. In fact, let me go ahead and hide the Quarks for a moment here so we just look at the Tanya, and you can see that how much extra bass there is. While the upper mid-range might come to a similar peak to the Quarks, it's pretty similar there, right? The big difference here is how it is in relation to the bass, where in the bass frequencies, and we'll highlight that, we've got our mid bass and our sub bass frequencies. The Tanya has a lot more bass. So not only is it going to sound like it has more bass, this upper mid-range peak, where they're again pretty similar, is not going to sound the same. In fact, it's going to sound like the vocals are they're going to be further back on something like the Tanya. But yeah, I think a tool like squig.link will be a pretty good way for you to analyze the sound, especially if you've got two different frames of reference, something like the Quarks and the Tanya, but perhaps you've got some other IM, and you can take a look. This is my index of all the different IMs that I've measured. Feel free to play around with this thing and compare to your newly minted Quarks to see if you can start to come up with some findings and start making sense of all this frequency response nonsense. Hopefully that helps. Ahmed saying, new here, only ever used the headphones that came with my iPhone. Ordered the Quarks last week after choosing between the Tanya and the SSP. I hope they sound as good as the EarPods or better. Here's the thing about the EarPods. So, well, first of all, I just want to say, I think the EarPods actually sound pretty decent. They get a lot of flack. But as far as earbuds go, the EarPods, not too shabby. That said, the big difference here is that you're going to be going from an earbud to an IM. And the difference is that the earbud kind of rests inside your concha here, and it doesn't create a seal. It gives you maybe a little bit more of an open sounding just sound in general. But what you don't really get with an open earbud is you don't get that seal, and you don't get a lot of like that bass texture. Pretty much, I don't know, there's I can't think of any, frankly, earbuds that really give a strong sense of bass. So while the Moondrop Quarks, I said not a bassy sounding earphone, I think that the sensation of bass is going to come across stronger on the Quarks than it does on something like the EarPods. And again, that's a lot to do with the fact that the Quarks is going to be a sealed fit. Now, another thing just to warn you as this thing's on its way is that sealed fit's going to feel different. Something like the Quarks, this is a pretty inoffensive design. I don't think most people are going to have an issue with this. In fact, I don't know. I think most people are getting more accustomed to having a sealed ear canal. But if you haven't done it before, it might be initially, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but it might be a little bit uncomfortable, right? Not like pain. It shouldn't be hurting you. But it might feel like not the most natural thing to have your ears actually plugged up. Try and get through that, because on the other side of that is access to the plethora of hi-fi IMs. And I don't know, I find it to be a pretty fun hobby. It's kept me interested for long enough. Creo's Mind saying, I finally got a DAP. It was a childhood dream of mine to have an MP3 player. You got the File M3K for $45. Wow, that's pretty good price. Bradford asking, am I planning to review the HBB Triple Win Melee? Yes, I actually ordered one. It should be here soonish, I think, but that is on the way. P-Kick saying, my friend is looking for earbuds around 25 to 30 bucks. The best he's heard so far are Marley Buds. I feel like I've heard that name before, but I don't know what those are. But you can get pretty much anywhere. What IMs would I recommend that would impress someone new to audio? So this again is where I would recommend heading over to squig.link. Let me pull it up on the, here we go, squig.link. And then look in the header for this rankings button. Click over here, and this is a list of all of the IMs that I've listened to and rated. You can apply a filter of 0 to 25 bucks because that's your budget. You can say I only want the 5 and 4 stars, and then here's a list of all the $25 and cheaper IMs that I think are worth checking out. So my top pick at under 25 bucks is going to be something like the Final E500. But things like the Tanya, actually, that's under 3 stars because I gave that one a 3-star. Also probably worth considering, and then you can check out the review here where I actually did some comparisons. And I think a tool like this would probably be a good thing to send to your friend. Pritzy asking, would I ever review the Nothing Ear 1? I mean, I'm interested to hear it, but I guess I just don't have high expectations, so I haven't gone out of my way to hear it and review it. Brian Young asking, could I do a video explaining the differences in reviewer targets on SquigLink? Interesting. That seems like it could be a worthwhile video. Yeah. I would say keep asking me about that too. If I forget, just keep asking me. Keep bugging me, because that's a good one. Jeffrey asking, File releasing a new single dynamic driver IM, the FD7. Hopefully you get a chance to review it. And they're actually, I wasn't sure about that one, but File actually pinged me, I think just today, asking if I was interested in reviewing it. And I said yes, so we'll see what happens. Martine Ferrer. I don't know if that was a typo, Freudian slip, or a joke, but Squig Kink is amazing. I think I got a new website to build. Oh, there you go, Planet Jace. I think Squig Kink is an amazing idea for a site where you measure the kink response of a cable in graph form. Okay. I was thinking something else. I think something else might be more popular too. Vitor Machado asking, is there any information to interpret from the height of the resonance point in an IM's frequency response, or should I just sort of ignore it? And let's go ahead and go back. Let's go back to the display. And what they're referring to is if I go back over to my graph tool. All right, here we go. So let's pull the quarks back up again, just so that we're talking about, oh, you know what? The quarks is actually not a good example. So basically, who was it that said that? Vitor. Basically what Vitor is referring to is that typically here at around 8,000 hertz, it's pretty common to see a peak in the frequency response. Like it's very, very consistent. In fact, let me go ahead and clear that out and just go through a number of these, right? The Audio Lokahi, 8K, there's a peak there. Audio Sensei Q7, there's a peak there. The Alglamour F300, there's a peak there. The BGVP DM8, look, there's a peak there at 8K. Everything has a peak at 8K. And you might think, well, that seems like a weird coincidence, but it's actually not a coincidence. Basically, as I'm measuring these earphones, as I'm inserting it into the microphone that I've got, which I'll pull it up here, that's what it looks like. I don't know, you can't see that. But anyway, as I'm inserting it into the microphone, there's basically this resonance that happens where a frequency, depending on how deep I have the earphone inserted into that microphone, that peak that we see here at 8K can actually move around. It might appear at 7K, it might appear at 10K. And a lot of us IM measurers, we intentionally measure it so that it's consistently at 8K just so that that's consistent. And so that, I don't know, like I'll just say generally the frequency responses in the treble region above like 7,000K are less reliable than the rest of the frequency response. I wouldn't say throw out that data because I do find it to be informative, but it's less reliable. And now, to your point, Vitor, you're asking, basically, does the degree of this peak matter? Does it actually, play a part in the frequency response? And yes, it does. So let me pull up an example of the FiO FH5S, which is a pretty good example of a very large resonance peak. And it's not always the case with an IM that has large resonance peak, but it's definitely the case with this. Let's see, I think the FLC8P is probably another good example. Look at that fairly hefty resonance peak. I think the acoustics, that one's not too bad. That one's pretty bad right there. So what these IMs do have in common is fairly harsh mid-treble. And in fact, a lot of the ways that comes across is in sibilance. And sibilance in sounds is just like vocals that have S sounds in them, like I'm saying the word sibilance a lot. On certain recordings, it's sort of like a combination of the recording plus the earphone, just comes across as this really harsh, unpleasant sound. So I like to cite Church's song Graffiti as an example. Just like the entire first verse of it is kind of painful to listen to on certain earphones and certain headphones because of the sibilance in the recording. And I find that having a large peak in this mid-treble region, which again, having an 8K peak is typical. Having a large 8K peak like that, not necessarily typical. And I find that having a very large 8K peak like this is generally pretty indicative of harshness in the mid-treble, which might come across as sibilance. But I would say that's kind of a soft rule. I would say generally, if you see an especially large 8K peak, it's probably real. But how it relates to the rest of the sound is still going to depend on a lot more than just does that peak exist. All right, Jace, I'm confused about what type of shaming you're doing right now. Are you kink shaming? Is that what's going on? That's okay. And then Ibrahim saying hello, follow you from Saudi Arabia. Wow. Glad to have a viewer in Saudi Arabia. Good to talk. And I think, unfortunately, that's going to make it. That's going to bring us to the end of this stream. If you like this video, if you enjoyed hanging out and having a chat, I did. I'm going to smash the like button, but if you want to go ahead and help me out, smash the like button yourself. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I do really recommend joining the Discord server. Link in the description down below. I'm there all the time. You can chat with me in real time. You can chat with a number of folks who are really, really helpful in terms of helping people find IMs, just discussing IMs, discussing photography, cameras, earbuds. We got an earbuds channel. Yeah, the Discord server is a good place. But otherwise, I guess I'll catch you on the next super review and have a good week. Cheers.